On an autumn evening in Los Angeles, the cool breeze spread through the streets. But inside Jack Davis's apartment, the atmosphere was heavy and still. Jack, a successful lawyer, had been married for 16 years to Emily, a gentle, intelligent, and loving woman. They had shared many sweet years together, but now all that remained between them were moments of emptiness and silence. The long nights no longer echoed with laughter, and the cozy dinners had turned into hurried meals, with each person living in their own world. Everything was no longer as it once was. Jack knew. Even Emily noticed the change, but instead of confronting the issue, they chose to avoid it. Both seemed to have lost the deep connection they once had, and their conversations had turned into trivial questions about work and life. Although Emily didn't say it, the loneliness in her eyes was undeniable. She seemed to be just a part of Jack's busy life. In the mornings, she spent time working, while Jack buried himself in meetings and large projects. They no longer had time for each other, and gradually, the sense of distance became an inseparable part of their daily lives. The changes in their marriage didn't only affect them, but also spread to their daughter, Ava. Ava, now 14 years old, like any other child at her age, was beginning to explore her own world, but instead of finding support and love from her family, Ava felt like she was living in a cold space where her attempts to connect with her parents were in vain. She began to close herself off, with only brief conversations and incomplete meals, making the rift in the family more and more apparent. Jack couldn't imagine that one day these small changes in his life would lead to such a big turning point. But at this moment, he only felt an invisible sadness enveloping his life, and the peace he once thought was happiness was slowly fading away. On an early weekday, when the golden leaves fell on the streets of Los Angeles, Jack happened to meet Emily at a company event where he was attending a legal seminar. Emily was a new colleague, a woman with long hair, bright eyes, and a smile that always shone like sunlight. She was in charge of public relations, full of enthusiasm, and with a personable nature. They happened to chat when Jack faced a difficult question from a client during the seminar, and Emily quickly offered some convincing advice. What Jack didn't expect was the connection between him and Emily. At first it was just work-related talk, sharing about the big project the company was working on, but soon these conversations began to last longer, not just stopping at work but also expanding to personal lives, hobbies, and experiences they both had gone through. Emily, unlike Jack's wife, was always full of life, free and open-minded. She didn't just listen to Jack, she made him feel cared for and appreciated. The thoughtful questions and sincere compliments from Emily made Jack feel alive again. The sense of being understood, being seen, and especially not being judged, made Jack feel a special connection with her. A week after their first meeting, Jack and Emily began seeing each other more frequently during group meetings and work exchanges. But then, those exchanges were no longer just about work. They started texting during lunch breaks, checking in on small things in life, from hobbies to future plans. Their conversations had no end, and their exchanges became deeper. Jack knew that each time he met Emily, he felt like he was returning to his true self, the energetic and passionate man, not the tired and emotionless husband he had become in Sarah's eyes. Gradually, Emily's presence became an indispensable part of Jack's day. Their conversations were no longer just work exchanges, but had started to include real interest, a genuine concern. Jack began to realize that his relationship with Emily was growing beyond the level of colleagues, and a sweet feeling that he hadn't experienced in a long time was slowly appearing in his heart, although Jack didn't want to admit it. He also knew that this feeling was overpowering the emotions he had for Sarah, the wife he had once loved deeply. But he also knew that everything came at a cost, and that cost could be very high. Jack told himself to be careful, but he couldn't stop when he had already started drowning in Emily's attention and care. Though guilt began to rise in his heart, the attraction Emily brought was too strong for him to let go. The change in Jack's feelings had officially begun, and it led him down a path he had never expected. After the accidental meeting at the cafe, Jack couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Each day he eagerly awaited any opportunity to meet her again. Although they were just colleagues, every time they exchanged work, Jack felt a special connection between them. What started as a flicker of light had now become a burning fire, an unstoppable flame. A week after that meeting, Emily proactively texted Jack, inviting him to a small company party on the weekend. "Hi, Jack. I know you're not fond of big parties, but we'll have a small dinner with a few colleagues, and the space is quite relaxed. Would you like to join?" Emily's message made Jack's heart race. He had thought that the meeting was just a coincidence, but now Emily seemed to want to pull him into her world, and that excited him even more. When Jack entered the party, he couldn't take his eyes off Emily. She was still the same, gentle and alluring. But today, something was different. She wore a simple black dress that accentuated her perfect figure, and her long hair flowing down made her face even more radiant. Emily looked at him, and in her gaze, Jack saw something new, an undeniable attraction. From that moment, each time their eyes met, both of them felt the tension between them. Their conversations became sweeter, their smiles more frequent. The feelings between them no longer seemed like just attraction, but had become an immersion in every moment they spent together. One evening, as they left the party together, walking outside under the dim yellow lights of the city, Jack and Emily stopped for a moment, saying nothing. The air between them was thick, and Jack could feel every beat of his heart. Emily looked at him, her eyes glowing in the night. She stepped closer, and the space between them grew smaller. "Jack," Emily spoke softly, her voice sinking into his heart. "I feel I haven't met anyone who understands me like you do in a long time." Not knowing how to reply, Jack simply stayed silent. His heart was pounding. He felt an irresistible urge, a sense that something was about to happen. The world around them seemed to stop as their eyes locked. And then, when there was no distance between them, Jack couldn't hold back any longer. He gently leaned down and kissed Emily. The first time their lips touched, all the feelings Jack had suppressed for so long burst out. It was a gentle kiss, but full of passion, like the merging of everything he had missed for so long. He felt alive again, as if a fresh breeze had blown into his life, like finding something he had lost a long time ago. After that kiss, neither of them spoke, only standing silently in each other's arms. The feeling was sweet, but it also carried an undeniable sense of torment. Jack knew this wouldn't be easy, and he would have to face serious consequences, but in that moment, nothing else seemed important. All he could feel was Emily and what she brought to him, a fresh feeling, full of passion and unstoppable. That night, as he returned home, Jack couldn't shake the feeling of Emily from his mind. He lay in bed, in the dark, feeling every beat of his heart. His feelings for Sarah had gradually faded, and now all he had was Emily's image in his mind, like a longing he couldn't shake. This infatuation wasn't just about an affair. It was a wake-up call for Jack, something he had never thought about. Love, connection, and things he hadn't explored in his life. But would he dare to face it? Would he have the courage to do what's right, or continue living in the shadow of his secrets? "Have you noticed it for a long time?" Sarah continued, her voice seemingly trying to hold back emotions. "I know there's a distance between us, but I didn't expect it to be this big. You no longer pay attention to me, no longer care about the family. and you're not the man I once loved. Jack felt the guilt rising in his heart. He wanted to explain, but words couldn't express what he was truly feeling. He couldn't deny that Sarah was right. He had neglected the family, neglected his devoted wife. But for a long time he had lived in lies, in secrets that had now pushed him to the edge of collapse. Sarah looked at him, waiting, as though she wanted to find the truth in his eyes. Jack could no longer stay silent. And finally he had to admit, "Sarah, I'm sorry. I don't know how to explain, but I have someone else." As soon as those words left his mouth, Jack felt a violent wave rush through him. He saw the change in Sarah's eyes. It wasn't anger, but deep disappointment, an unbearable pain that could never be erased. "I knew," Sarah whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "I felt it, but I didn't want to believe it. You've lied to me, Jack. I can't believe it." The guilt in Jack felt like a fire burning him. He had betrayed the woman who had always been there for him, loved him wholeheartedly. Everything in his life now seemed to be crumbling. Sarah stood up, turned her back to him, and Jack knew that there was nothing left to save. "What more do you want, Jack?" Sarah asked in heavy silence. "Do you want to keep this family, or do you want to choose a new life with her, with what you've found out there?" That question hit Jack like a strong blow to the heart. He didn't know how to answer, only knowing that he was standing before a choice that had no easy price. He wanted to keep the family, to keep the love he once had for Sarah, but at the same time, he couldn't deny the powerful emotions that Emily had brought to him. Jack felt everything inside him shattering. He looked into Sarah's eyes, seeing the pain, the disappointment, and the endless sadness in them. She deserved a man who was honest. She deserved a love that was whole. "Won't you forgive me?" Jack spoke, but his voice was hoarse. Sarah turned back to look at him one last time, her gaze cutting deep into his soul. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Jack. I can't keep living in this lie anymore." Sarah left the room, leaving Jack alone with the words that had just been revealed. For the first time in his life, Jack felt completely lost. The question of choice was no longer the only thing that needed answering, but how he would live with himself, with the decisions he had made and the mistakes that couldn't be fixed. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. Sarah's words still echoed in his head like a violent wave that couldn't be stopped. He sat alone in the darkness, feeling the emptiness fill the room. Everything had changed, and now he had to face the consequences of what he had done. Regret flooded him, but he couldn't deny that his feelings for Emily had made him lose his reasoning. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight shone through the room, Jack felt like he was living in a nightmare. Sarah had left the house early in the morning without a word. Everything in the house was the same, but the atmosphere was heavy, a clear difference from any other day. Jack knew that the truth could no longer be hidden. Everything was slipping out of his hands, and now he couldn't go back. While Jack sat blankly in the living room, his phone suddenly vibrated. It was a message from Emily. He opened it, only to see simple words that were enough to make him feel like the world was falling apart. "We need to talk, Jack. I've heard about it." The message from Emily was like a warning, and Jack felt like he was standing at a crossroads he couldn't avoid. He knew he couldn't hide anymore. What had happened had to be faced, and no one could escape the truth. When they met, Emily didn't show anger or blame. She only silently looked at Jack, her eyes sad and disappointed. "Jack, I didn't think I'd end up in this situation," Emily said, her voice soft but sharp. "I really don't understand. Why did you do this?" Jack felt choked up, unable to speak. He knew he was wrong, but now, Saying sorry or justifying himself couldn't fix the situation. The emotions he had for Emily were undeniable, but everything had become tangled and complicated. He looked into her eyes, realizing that their relationship was no longer the sweetness it once was. It had become a burden, a betrayal that both he and she had to bear. "I heard from Sarah," Emily continued, her voice no longer as firm as before. "She told me everything, Jack. I feel like I've been lied to, used. Why me, Jack? Why couldn't you face what you have and fight for it?" Jack didn't answer, because he had no satisfying answer. Emily's words cut deep into his heart like knives. Each word she said made him feel a wave of pain rise inside him. He couldn't continue living in this lie, but he didn't know how to go back, how to heal the wounds he had caused. In the meantime, a call from Sarah came in on Jack's phone. He looked at the screen, feeling like it was a punishment. Should he take the call? Could he face Sarah, the woman he had betrayed? "You can't keep living in this darkness anymore, Jack," Emily said, her voice full of pain. "Everything has been exposed. What you're doing is just making everything worse. If you really want to change, you need to face it all. But don't do it for me, because we can't change the past." When Jack looked into Emily's eyes, he realized that the love he had for her couldn't replace the truth. And this truth, though painful, was the only thing that could free him from the constant torment. From that point, Jack had to face some tough decisions. He realized that he couldn't go back to the past, couldn't erase the mistakes he had made. Sarah knew everything. Emily understood it all, and Jack was left with only wounds and deep regret. When he received the call from Sarah, he knew that the final confrontation would be the moment he had to pay the price for everything. Secrets could not be buried forever, and now everything was ready to be brought to light. Since the secrets had been exposed, the atmosphere in Jack's house was no longer warm. The walls of the family had cracked, and every day the feeling of it breaking apart became clearer. Everything seemed to have changed forever. Jack felt like a stranger in his own home, where every corner, every object, reminded him of the mistakes that couldn't be erased. After the conversation with Jack, Sarah no longer resembled the woman he had once loved. She became cold and distant. They no longer talked as before. No more cozy evenings together. The meals now were just empty ones, sitting across from each other with nothing to say. Every time Jack looked into Sarah's eyes, he felt guilt as a wave crashing to shore. Ava, their daughter, also gradually became distant. She no longer ran to hug her father in the morning, no longer asked about the daily stories. Instead, Ava just remained silent, her eyes staring into space, as if she didn't want to see her father, or didn't want to know the truth she was feeling inside. One evening, when Sarah and Ava had left to visit their grandmother, Jack sat alone in the living room. He looked around the house, feeling the silence and the pain overwhelming him. Everything that he had once considered normal now felt like pieces that couldn't be repaired. She was no longer the wife he once knew. She had changed, become a stranger. And so had he. He was no longer the man Sarah had once loved, no longer the husband, the father his family needed. All that was left was regret and the pain of the mistakes he had made. When Sarah returned that evening, everything was clear. No more lies, no more silence trying to hide the truth. Sarah looked at him, but her eyes no longer held warmth, only deep disappointment. "Jack," she began, her voice dry, "I can't live like this anymore. I can't continue in a marriage without trust." Those words hit Jack like a heavy blow to the heart. He knew that there was nothing to save, nothing that could fix the brokenness he had caused. Sarah had made up her mind, decided to leave to find herself. and even though it hurt, he could no longer protest. "I'm leaving, Jack," Sarah added, her eyes no longer shedding tears, just determination. "I need time to find myself, and I can't live in a family full of lies like this anymore." And then, everything shattered. Jack stood there, unable to do anything, only watching as Sarah packed her things and left the home they had once built together. Ava also decided to go with her mother. She said nothing, just looked at Jack coldly before turning her back and walking away. The whole house was now empty. No laughter, no warm moments. The beautiful memories of family now felt like a distant story he could no longer reach. Jack felt as though he were standing in the rubble of his own life, in regret and guilt that could never be washed away. He had no home, no wife, no daughter. All that remained was a cold loneliness, as if life had turned its back on him. And no matter what he tried, all he could do was stand there, watching the broken pieces of his life, a life he had destroyed with his own hands. The collapse of the family wasn't just the loss of a home, but the loss of himself in irreparable mistakes. Jack realized that, although he might find a new path, these wounds would never heal. And from that moment, he understood that love couldn't always save everything. Sometimes, only regret and time could soothe the pain that one caused themselves.